everybody. Welcome to another Lean in Olympia. My name is Meg. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Works. And Lean in Olympia is our bi-weekly show where myself and my co-host Corey Passons interview all kinds of amazing community members about all the cool stuff that is happening in our area. Today am continuing my series that I've been working on the last couple of months, interviewing folks who work at the City of Olympia in various different capacities, addressing housing and homelessness, but also many other large issues like reimagining public safety, as well as affordable housing, mental health response, all of that. So I'm continuing that today and really excited. Make sure that you follow us on YouTube and Spotify and Facebook. Hopefully by now you know where to find us. But today, my guest, I'm very excited, is Stacey Ray with the City of Olympia. Let me see if I can get it. Director of Strategic Planning and Performance.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Stacey, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Meg, and it's just great to see you again.
Yeah, totally. Well, just to get started, could you give a bit of an overview of your role and maybe also where it fits into the different city departments?
Yes. So my role is actually fairly new. So I lead the city's Office of Performance and Innovation, and we have three main areas of focus for the city. We focus on strategic planning, so across departments, so citywide strategic planning primarily. We focus on performance management, so how do we as a city organization use data to learn and improve? And we focus on process improvement. So how are we just delivering the best and highest quality services to our community members?
Cool. Can you talk a little bit about your background? Like what brought you to this job and to this place?
Yeah. So I actually have a background in environmental science, my undergraduate degree. So I came to work for the City of Olympia about 16 or 17 years ago. I kind of lose track. So,
I didn't realize you'd been with the city that long.
Have.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. So I started working community planning and development, and actually my focus was urban forestry. So, which means that I was out in the field a lot.
Yeah.
And I was working with people, and that's the piece of it that I loved is that I really, really enjoyed just working with homeowners, working with project developers, problem solving, while also having, because I was in urban forestry and planning and development, I had this long range view of like, okay, what does our tree canopy look like today? And what are we doing today to impact the future of that, 5, 10, 20 years down the road. So, and from there, I actually started shifting into more environmental planning. So starting to broaden kind of what I was working with in terms of not just urban forestry, but shorelines and, just habitat, setting aside different habitat areas. So that kind of planning work. And then, having been around for a while, in 2008, my job was almost eliminated with the city.
Oh, okay.
And so, because we were coming out of the recession.
Right.
And so the director of community planning and development at the time thought, maybe I would like to move into planning, having this kind of perspective of thinking, again, what are we doing today in order to prepare us for 5, 10, 20 years in the future? And really looking big picture at all the different elements of planning that go into that. So I did. So I shifted over to what we call long-range planning and immediately started working on an update to the city's comprehensive plan.
Okay.
So that's our 20-year plan. It's really encompasses our community's vision for what kind of community we want to be, what do we want to look like, and how do we want to grow over the next 20 years. So.
Yeah. How, just for people who are not like really familiar with it, like, could you just give a quick overview of how the comprehensive plan gets made and how it gets adopted?
Yeah. So the comprehensive plan is We do major updates about every 8 to 10 years as required by the state of Washington. And cities are required to have one. So, and again, it's that 20-year kind of goal and policy document. And it's really intended to guide all the other plans and work that we do. But in 2014, we went all in to really understand from the community, to do a full-blown update, to know what our community wanted, what the vision was, and what was important to community members. So we spent 2 to 3 years just going out, listening to community members, having conversations, and completely updating our comprehensive plan into this vision that was adopted in 2014. So.
And was that like pretty major changes? Like, did it transform the document pretty significantly?
It really did. I mean, it was the first time that we had done such a in-depth conversation with the community about what was important to them. So, and it started to bring in issues like, it was early conversations around climate change and just thinking about just the community we wanted to look like and be like in 20 years. So, yeah.
That's really cool. I always am like, I'm going to read the comprehensive plan. And then I never have. But I think it's important for people to know that it's there, especially for people that might not be, attending council meetings regularly or keeping up with the sort of city council business. I think it can be a really important resource for people to know about. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Well, Stacey and we met working on a strategic planning initiative for the city that was called the One Community Plan. And from my perspective, what that looked like was that I think it was a specific type of planning strategy that brought together what was like a community board of members from the community that had many different perspectives. And I sat on that board, not as really not as a homeless service provider, but as somebody who has been embedded in the community in many different ways. And I do bring a lot of knowledge and experience in that role, but my sort of task at hand, as I understood it, was to not be coming to that group as a homeless service provider, but more as a community member that has a lot of very different perspectives. And so there were other folks that had same kind of expertise and different stuff that were all sort of coming to the table with this idea of like, let's bring all the hats we wear, not just the one specific one. So that was a really cool experience for me meeting you and just going through that planning process. But I'm wondering if you would just talk a little bit about how the One Community Plan came about from your perspective.
Yeah. So, I really appreciate how you described how the group came together and what was so important about all the members that were in that work group. So what we used was this approach called participatory leadership, but it's a model that basically says that the best and wisest solutions for a community come from community members, which seems obvious, but, in planning circles, to some extent here, but generally just around when you get into planning, you think, okay, I want to work on a plan. I need to know what the community thinks. So I'm going to do a survey, and maybe I'll talk to some folks and I'll have an open house. And then I'm going to get my technical experts in a room and we're going to decide what goes in the plan, right? So, and this approach, again, is very community-based. And there's a few things that are really critical to this type of process that we went through. And you mentioned one of them, which is that bringing together community members to lead the process based on their lived experience and their perspectives, and not asking them to be representative of a particular organization.
Yeah.
So, and just like you said, it was so important that everyone around that table brought all the different hats they wear, and brought forward all the different conversations they were having. So that's one piece that's really important, the diversity of lived experiences and perspectives. The other piece is that we asked our city council, and they were very willing because they believed in this community-based approach, to take a step back. So you as a community work group member were not appointed by the council.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, and the council did not lead you through the process. So it wasn't led by electeds, and it wasn't led by city staff, but we were there instead to support you and to champion the process.
Right.
So, and that's also a very different approach. And then the other piece that's really a pillar to what we did is that it's really not successful if it's not inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So a big component of this was ensuring that we were, that diversity of lived experience and perspectives was not only, hopefully represented a bit through the group, but then also in the way that we were super intentional about going out and bringing folks, into spaces to have conversations with those variety of experiences. So.
Yeah. And can we just name some of what that looked like? Like when you were sort of vision boarding, what does that diversity look like? What were some of the kind of general buckets?
Yeah, so with the work that we were doing, I think right off the bat, we felt like it was really critical to hear from folks who had experienced homelessness or houselessness. And you and others that you worked with closely at the time helped us in creating a space for that, right? I think it was also we tried to do some of this at the time, but hearing from typically underrepresented groups, marginalized community members as well. I think as a city organization, we've since improved on that. And then also I would say, in terms of buckets, it was important that we talked to our business community. It was important that we talked to neighborhoods. We talked to community partner organizations that have been, like you mentioned earlier, embedded in this work, have been doing good work for decades.
Yeah.
We talked to faith-based organizations, again, that have been doing the work, so that we're bringing in the perspectives of folks who either have lived experience or have been in a position of being in, allyship or been right there on the front lines, understanding. That's what is so critical to this kind of process, is that as a city organization, we come to the table with so much technical expertise and best practices, and we can look at models all day long. But if we're not talking to folks who are living this on the day-to-day, who are closest to the problems, then we're not going to have solutions that make sense for our community and that are sustainable in the long run.
Yeah. 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 I think that that's what felt so interesting about that process, was just being able to, realize how to say this, being able to realize just having the time and container and space to actually try to understand a perspective that's different than your own. I don't think that there's a lot of room for that. And I think, unfortunately, and we can talk about this a little bit later, but I think we did all of this before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I think that space for really hearing each other's differing perspectives has shrunk even more during the pandemic and after the pandemic. And I think that we have tried to bring the group back together a little bit, and there's been some just the gears feel a little off from where we felt before. And so I've just been reflecting on that a lot, of how could this or just what was so important about it too, I think, was like the timing of which we did it.
Yes.
That really like helped make it successful.
Yeah.
And I know that for myself, I really did shift my perspective, and I know that other people did as well in that group. And we were able to find commonalities in unexpected places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all really like stretched to meet each other. And that's one of my biggest frustrations often about community processes, is that it's really hard to get anything done typically, because for every person who is like gonna show up every single day for housing rights and housing justice and stop sweeping camps and provide services for people, don't provide punitive measures, there are just as many, if not even more, people who are like, sweep all the camps. People need accountability. People need to be ticketed for things, people, and so it becomes really difficult to actually like get any traction or anything done on real solutions. And it feels to me like it just, the waters get muddied so quickly. And what was cool about that was that I felt like it was, everyone was able to say the full spectrum of thoughts, feelings, experiences, whatever. And we had the time and space and dedicated intention to like work through it and find solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you touch on a few of the other components that were really key to the success of that body of work together. And that was that one is this, you were just sharing space with each other. You built really true, authentic relationships with one another by spending the time and committing to this, like committing to each other, and then committing to the process. The other piece is that you all made a commitment to learning together. So in the planning circles, we call that co-learning and co-creation. But what it basically means is you said, yeah, I'm going to commit to showing up, next to you. And we're going to hear from folks that we may not agree with, but we're going to listen together. Right. And then we're going to go back to a space that we've created where we feel trust with each other to be able to share kind of the response that we're having. And I think going through COVID has definitely created some challenges with that. I think in my world, I'm really trying to reconcile people's love of remote meetings and hybrid meetings with the synergy and relationship that just comes through sitting across from someone and sharing a meal.
Yeah.
And so I think that we can't discount how much it matters to spend time getting to know someone on a very personal level.
Yeah.
To just understand a different perspective than your own and then be open to where that might lead you.
Yeah. 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 It was that part of it was really, really important. Especially when talking about things like issues that are such lightning rods, like in the community, and bring up so much like fear on all ends, anger on all ends, like hopelessness a lot of times on all ends. And it's just like, when you're in that space, like there has to be a trust and there has to be a willingness to really like meet each other where you're at. And I felt like what was really cool too, I mean, you alluded to this, but we were able to all share kind of like, here's, if you want the perspective of unhoused people, here's how we do this. Like we have a pizza party at the community care center. We have small group tables that are facilitated by people who they know, and it was, I forget, there was probably like 40 people that were there?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a very well-attended one, and I feel like we got a ton of information. And then it's like, if you want to talk to developers, like here's how you have to do that. If you want to talk to realtors, here's how you have to do that, like landlords, like whatever that is. And you were able to draw from the people on the community work group to help like almost get an in with the different aspects of the community that might not always be involved in these experience, like projects, you know?
Yes. And that becomes really important. And so I'll add to that based on my experience, because over the last 18 months or so, I was working on a similar approach to reimagining public safety for the City of Olympia. And we wanted to reach out to, again, like a lot of different groups in the community, demographic groups, in order to bring in, different lived experiences and perspectives. And it really matters. There's a few things that really, really matter in terms of the invitation. The first is that it has to be authentic. Like folks have to know that what they say and what they share and the vulnerability that they bring is going to be honored and respected and is going to result in change. So there has to be a commitment there, and it has to be very clear. But also what helps is that's more than just Stacey saying, I promise this is a real thing. That has to come through, like, that's why the work group is so critically important to helping extend those invitations. Because once the work group, who really is in a leadership role, in which case you were, and you can say, like, oh, I'm committing time to this, there will be an outcome that will make a difference. And so it's important to me, friend or partner or person I know, to have your voice in this process. It's just, we need those trusted partners to be able to invite people into these conversations that are just so critical. And the other thing I'll add is that we've worked really hard in starting with a lot of the lessons that I learned from you in engaging with, unhoused individuals, but in building from that about how do we reduce barriers for folks. Everyone has some barriers to participating with local government, whether it's just purely being busy or working 2 jobs, or whether it's really having negative experiences that have built up a world of mistrust, right? And so we've really tried to be more intentional in thinking about what we would call trusted or brave spaces look like for people. What does reduce a barrier? Is it a bus pass? Is it we're now at the city, we regularly pay stipends for folks who give us their lived knowledge. That's expertise, and we're paying them for that. Is it childcare? Is it a meal? Is it working around someone's work hours? So it's really, again, starting to think outside the box of, like, how do we create these spaces that are comfortable and enable people to participate.
Yeah. Stacey, will you talk a little bit about, like, what was the outcome of the One Plan for Olympia? Like that, the process obviously itself, I believe, is an outcome. But for anybody that's like, okay, it's all talk, but what's the action? Like, what was sort of the outcome of the One Plan for Olympia?
Yeah. So there is a One Community Plan, and it has 3 focus areas that have to do, don't quote me on the exact language, but that have to do with streamlining and providing services, with creating and preserving affordable housing, and public safety. And within those, your work group developed strategies and proposed actions. Now, right after the council accepted that plan, which basically means the city council said, we fully support, this process, and we can get behind how we got to this plan, and we're going to accept it, and we want staff to move forward with carrying it out. So once the council accepted it, unfortunately, we went right into COVID, basically. But we have staff at the city that have been carrying out that plan. It has been the guidance for how we're addressing housing and homelessness.
And by carrying out the plan, like that means like funding decisions, policy decisions, like any kind of action that the city is going to take on housing and homelessness has to somehow correlate with the goals and outcomes that are laid out in the plan.
Yeah, I mean, we're able to point back to a strategy or an action in the plan.
Mm-hmm.
I will say the plan was not wholly intentionally meant to be just carried out by the city. There's a lot in there that partners have a role in as well, or things that maybe we just don't have the ability to do. So it's really a shared investment in carrying it out. But for those things that we have the ability to and the influence over, we have been moving them forward and trying to do so in a really balanced way. So that was the other thing about the plan, is it wasn't like you want to pick things a la carte from these different sections. It was really about moving forward with those 3 focus areas in as much balance as we can.
Yeah.
And so through our housing and homelessness team, through community planning and development, through the police department, I mean, really have been moving forward on what overall the plan expressed was this balance between compassion and accountability. And we've been doing so in, all kinds of different ways through guidance from the plan.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's like buy-in from all departments about the plan? Like, for the most part, are people like, yeah, this kind of captures all of it and we feel like we can really move forward with this?
I think by and large, everyone is very supportive that the plan is representative of the community.
Yeah.
I think that balance within the plan, strikes, us as being the right balance. And I think, but I will say there's a next step that we've embarked on, which is, the plan was accepted by council, and then we went into COVID. And so we never really had a chance to pause and say, we started moving things forward and have made, put phenomenal amounts of resources and energy and made really extraordinary progress. But it's also been a bit reactive. It's been a bit of like, okay, we've had the ability to take advantage of certain funding that's come from the state and whatnot. But at this point, I'm working with staff from across departments to pause and go back to the One Community Plan and develop what we're calling our strategic plan.
Okay.
So really looking at the next 5 years and saying, what have we accomplished? Are we in balance? What are the resources, tools that we have available to us that we know about today or can anticipate will be available in the next 5 years? And then what do we prioritize what to do next? So been just kind of making sure that we're being intentional. And I think when you go through a process like this, it's out of respect to continue to reflect on where are we at in terms of carrying out what our community reflected was the path forward. How are we doing? And again, the kind of looking at how do we continue to be strategic and making sure we're making progress. Yeah.
Do you feel like the pandemic, this is so funny to say out loud, like changed anything? I'm like, but I guess I just mean like, do you feel like the goals that we laid out and were representative of the community perspective, like, is it still relevant? Like, do you feel like it's still...
From my perspective, from our perspective, since I've been in this work for several months with other city staff and leadership and looking at the One Community Plan, we feel like it still holds true.
Yeah.
We feel like it's still very reflective of the path forward. We feel like the work that's been accomplished on it is still very much in alignment with what the community desires. Now, is there definitely some struggle, and are we hearing some feedback and a lot of impatience maybe and questions about what we're doing? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? And did the pandemic impact our ability? in some ways positively, some funds became available that allowed us to move forward in some areas that we might never have been able to.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the pandemic, for example, made it harder maybe to bring folks into housing or sheltered situations, or in some cases, hold folks accountable in a way that might move them towards a better path. So it's, a pandemic kind of threw us through a loop. But again, it's why we're pausing and thinking like, okay, we've had several years of working towards implementing this, and we have the ability now to take a breath and say, what's working?
Mm-hmm.
What's really working? What's making the difference? What's the help that helps? I will say that our Director of Housing and Homelessness, Darian Lightfoot, has done an extraordinary job of expanding our partnerships and the regional relationships that we have in order to kind of broaden how we look at our response.
Mm-hmm.
When we worked on that plan, I think we can safely say there wasn't, like, Olympia was really a bit out in front in terms of addressing the crisis.
Yeah.
And I think through, we've made a lot of great strides there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the pandemic made it impacted us both positive. It made things a bit better in some ways, and it made things harder.
Yeah.
And I think we're taking a breath and looking at, okay, what do we do next?
Yeah, that's cool. Where can people see the plan if they're interested in looking at it and looking at the details?
Yeah, so we have it on our city website. It is called the One Community Plan, and it's very intentional. It's like, it is about all of us, and the roles that we play as a full community in addressing this national crisis,
Mm-hmm.
that we see really taking place really locally, and impacting our friends and neighbors.
Yeah, yeah. How has going through the One Community, you mentioned this a little bit, but how has going through the One Community Plan process impacted now the reimagining public safety? And I guess just to caveat, would you say that it's accurate to say that the reimagining public safety process is in large part due to a lot of the uprisings that were happening in 2020 and community members that were just really, all of us, I think, were reflecting extremely deeply on racial injustice in our country, but also how that plays out every single day in our own community here in Olympia. And so my perspective is that the reimagining public safety effort was the city saying, we're going to look at this and we're going to look at this deeply and we're going to come up with some tangible outcomes. Is that an accurate representation of it?
Yeah, I would say yes. So definitely the call for a conversation with the community came out of the social uprising, out of the murder of George Floyd. We had a lot of community members that were coming to the city council and saying, you need to act now, you need to do something. And the council, having reflected on the One Community process, again, kind of relied on this thinking of, this is incredibly complex. We don't feel like we want to act quickly on this. We feel like we want to talk to our community, and we want, again, to be community-based in our solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started to look at we essentially did a very similar, they said, we want that. We want what we did there.
Yeah.
Because the outcome was this really balanced approach that they could rest on to say, yeah, this is representative of the community. And so we did. We spent 18 months, and I will say it was originally intended to be a bit shorter, but I think when you're it's better to do something right than to try to do it quickly.
Yeah.
And I know that can create frustration for folks. I live in that planning world, and so I often kind of get a little bit of heat for like your process takes a long time.
Yeah.
But when you're working with really complex issues that are really really based in folks' lived experiences and values.
Yeah.
Like the dialogue has to be built off of trust and relationship and learning and understanding and curiosity, and those things don't pop up overnight.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
similar to One Community, we brought a phenomenal work group together with just community members with a real variety of, again, perspectives and lived experiences. Some that were in the public safety realm and others that were not. And we took a lot of learnings from the One Community Plan and applied it to reimagining public safety as well.
So where are things at with that now?
So the council in December accepted the recommendations from the work group, and I have since been moving forward with several initiatives that have come out of those recommendations. So, for example, one of the recommendations that we heard from the work group was to really, as a city organization, continue to acknowledge harm caused to marginalized community members, to continue to host dialogue with community members to understand what's important to them, what is their lived experience, and then use that to influence city priorities and decision making. So right now I'm working on identifying community partners to have some conversations, with particularly marginalized community members to try to build stronger relationship and connection. We've been talking a lot from the experience with that work group. I learned a lot around what it looks like for a city organization to talk to community members not in a transactional way. Like, oh, Meg, I want to hear what you think about how we should spend $500,000 in the budget this year. Right? And then thank you very much. I'm not going to talk to you again for a year.
Yeah.
But shifting to community members are critically important to us, and I want to be in relationship with you, throughout the year.
Yeah.
And if you have something that's important to you, I want you to feel like you can bring it forward.
Yeah.
And it's not just me asking you questions when I need the answers.
Right.
So that's one thing that I'm working on that's actually come out of that process. The other thing is the Olympia Police Department. I'm supporting them with updating their 5-year strategic plan to integrate the recommendations from Reimagining Public Safety.
Is that something that community members can be a part of at all, or is that like?
That's really working off of we're taking a deep dive into what we heard from Reimagining. So that's making sure that all of the engagement we did there is now wrapped into that 5-year strategic plan.
Okay.
So and then I'm trying to think. And then the other thing is similar to what I'm working on with the One Community Plan, with thinking about what's the next 5 years. We'll also be doing that for the Reimagining Public Safety.
Okay.
So without the big COVID break in the middle,
we
can now take the recommendations and create an actual 1 to 5 year timeline and prioritize, and then start to implement those things in a more strategic way.
Would you say that the balance, I guess I'm like, how do you feel like the work group feels about the outcome? I'm sure that that's a complex question, but I would characterize my experience with the work group for the One Community Plan, that everybody had elements that they liked and everybody had elements that they didn't like. And that was sort of part of the deal. But we got to a place where everyone could move forward. Even if there were things that were specifically I don't agree with that thing, but that thing for me would be less harmful than the other things that were on the table that we worked through to get through. Right. And so like I don't see the one community plan as like everyone's happy and we're like everyone's together, and it's like it really is this balance of community perspective. Some of which some of us agree with, some of which some of us don't, and for various different reasons. And so is it similar, would you say?
Yes, and I think, and I just want to back up for a second and say that there is one moment with one community that sticks out to me. And it was like, and I had such deep respect for you for saying that, because what you said was something. I'm not going to give you the exact words, but you reflected that at the end to the council, to the city council. You said, I don't agree with everything that's in this plan, but I do feel like it's representative of the community.
Yeah.
And that's an incredibly hard thing. That is a very challenging thing to do, to be able to see everything that you heard and listened to as a group and be able to create something.
Yeah.
And be able to step back from something that maybe you felt strongly about, right?
Yeah.
In order to reach that final outcome with the group, and I would say that the Reimagining Public Safety work group members able to do that as well. And it's hard. I mean, the thing we asked them to do was hard.
Yeah.
The thing we asked you to do was hard.
Yeah.
But that's why for us as staff and for the council, we can feel so confident in the outcome.
Right.
Right. I think what was slightly different with Reimagining is because, again, every issue is different. Reimagining had such great impact on the police department. And so we also did a lot of information gathering and learning through the police department and integrated that input as well into the community input that went into Reimagining. And so the work group was charged with balancing all of those different perspectives and coming out with a recommendation. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you feel like that same sort of balance that we were able to get to is represented in this plan as well.
I do think so, yeah.
Yeah.
That, and, it's in Olympia, like, we pride ourselves in being forward thinking, and being on the cutting edge. And I definitely believe that's why I really love working for this organization. I feel like we are always wanting to model, being advanced in our practices and listening to our community. And I also think our community pushes us to do that.
Yeah.
I think it's okay for us to understand the expectations that our community has for how we are in service to them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, overall, is it in balance? Yeah. But, the community is also going to push us to do what makes sense and is in the best interest of our community members.
Yeah.
And we're going to listen to that.
Yeah. And, okay, sometimes I go on soapboxes. But I also think that the part about what I said, like with the council, being like, I don't agree with everything that's in here, but I do think that it's representative of the community. I think that we tend to have this really projection of a progressive identity as a community, like that there is a lot of people who live here who I think would say, I'm a very open person. I'm even a liberal person. I maybe am very progressive on these certain types of issues. And then and I think that that's true, but I think that there is also a very large part of our community who does not identify that way, or who does identify that way, but then when certain times, like in my experience opening a shelter in people's neighborhoods, come to like rubber meet the road moments, there is like less living of that identity than there is talking of that identity.
Yeah.
And I think that if we're talking about homelessness, if we're talking about affordable housing, if we're talking about police reform, if we're talking about these issues that are like such lightning rod issues in the community, we can't actually come to any solutions if we're not telling the truth about who we really are as a community. And so that's what I appreciate about it, is that it kind of provided the ability for us to say we're not a super only progressive liberal community that's like open to everything. We actually do have a lot of conservative ideals that are also part of this. And if we're going to have any kind of roadmap that's going to make any sort of actual progress, like, we have to tell the truth about that.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that, but that was, I don't know.
Well, here's one of the things I've been working with community members and trying to bring them into local government for 10 plus years. And one of the things I've learned is that when you are dealing with something as complex as homelessness, affordable housing, public safety, social justice, is that if the answers aren't necessarily clear, we tend to default to what we know and where we're comfortable, right? And that's pretty normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think where change happens is when we have time to process and dialogue and learn. But in order for someone to kind of be in their learning side of their brain, you also kind of have to reduce the tension or reduce stuff, right?
Yeah.
So when you're in fear response, when you're in anger response, it's much, much harder to be able to learn something new, see a different perspective, understand why something is happening, think about the big picture. And so I think one of the reasons why I believe in the process that we went through and why I think it's continuing to advance how we solve problems as a community, I believe in this is because we create spaces where we can be with each other. We can create that space to learn from each other, to kind of unpack these issues that are so complex, and then to find the things that we can do locally. It's not the easy answer. It's not the quick answer, right? But I think by understanding why people might be reacting the way they're reacting, it can help us start to figure out how to better talk about what's going on in our world, our state, and our city in a way that people could maybe start to understand it a little bit better. Just tell stories, right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. And yeah, I really respect the work that you do. I feel like it takes a lot of energy to hear things from all sides at all times. And so I just thank you for playing that role and for bringing other staff folks at City of Olympia. Like, I mean, I don't think that everybody was super on board at first. Like, I feel like you really had to kind of sell it to get it passed through, a different approach to city planning. And I know that you and the plan itself have been recognized. Wasn't there like an award or something that the plan got? Yeah. So I want to shout out to you for that. And, I think you've really kind of shifted the perspective of how the city operates in a major way. And
well, thank you for that.
I really respect you for that.
Well, thank you. But I have to say, my job is to create a situation where someone like you and your other work group members can bring like your passion, your creativity, your advocacy, and your just pure love for this community to the table, and then have a tangible impact at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you and the others in your work group told me is they said, this had better not be a plan that sits on a shelf.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, it's not going to sit on a shelf. Right. And it hasn't. And that's what keeps me coming back is creating the situation where you and other worker members, other community members can really feel the impact that your voice can have on city government. So
yeah. Well, thank you, Stacey. I'm curious, I've kind of asked every city employee this that has been on my little series, but from your perspective, like, is there one or a couple of things that you really wish the community knew?
Yeah.
About just the work that you do or the role that you play in the city, anything like that? Is there just something you wish the community knew?
I just want the community to know that if you ever find yourself with an invitation to have your voice heard by the City of Olympia, please accept that invitation. Mm-hmm. Your voice, your lived experience, your expertise, your creativity, all of it is so tremendously valued by us and so respected that you would gift us your time, that please come and have a conversation with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stacey. So you heard it. You heard it here, folks. Check your inboxes. Say yes to the dress if City of Olympia asks you to participate. And I really can attest. And I don't know if it's the size of our city or what, but like, you know, the Interfaith Works Homeless Services as we know it would not be a thing that it is today had I not gone with my friends to city council and started being like, this isn't right, this should be different, and it's like how we got connected to Interfaith Works. It's how we started this whole momentum of fundamentally shifting the way that our city addresses homelessness. And you really can, especially at the local city level, your voice really can change real tangible resources, funding resources, policy resources, all of those things. And so, I agree with you. And I hope that there are more and more opportunities for folks to be able to have their voices heard and for all different kinds of people. And so thanks for making that space possible.
Thank you.
All right. I think that does it for us today. We will be back next time with Corey. And again, you can always find us on YouTube, Interfaith Works Thurston County, and Spotify if you are out and about in this beautiful weather and want to listen to us on your headphones. Stacey, thank you so much for taking the time. As always, shout out to Porcupine behind the cameras, Logan. And we'll see you next time.